Hey guys, tonight we're drifting 3,000 years back to the papyrus-scented banks of the Nile, where lovesick Egyptians didn't swipe right. They ground beetles into powder, whispered incantations over knotted threads, and buried wax dolls beneath doorsteps. You're standing in a dim mud-brick room as a magician mixes honey with something far more intimate, promising that by sunrise the merchant's daughter, who ignored you at the market, will find herself helplessly drawn to your door. The air smells of myrrh and desperation. Outside, the river laps against reed boats, indifferent to the 1,000 small dramas unfolding in every household, each one tangled in the same ancient question: how do you make someone love you when the heart refuses to cooperate? The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for, like why your grandmother warned you never to give away a lock of your hair, or why certain folk remedies still call for honey mixed with, let's just say, very personal ingredients. So before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below, but make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. Tell me where you're watching from tonight, or which ancient civilization fascinates you most. Maybe you're tucked in bed in Toronto, or perhaps you're listening during a late shift in Singapore. I'd love to know. Now let's keep the lights as soft as possible, turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You're holding a fragment of papyrus, brittle and brown, covered in demotic script that coils like snakes across the fibre. This particular scroll comes from Oxyrhynchus, a trash heap that archaeologists lovingly call the most important rubbish dump in history. Someone 3 millennia ago paid good money for this document. A recipe really, though not for bread or beer. The instructions are precise. Take honey from the first harvest, mix it with red ochre ground from the cliffs near Aswan, add 3 drops of your own blood drawn at midnight, and finally, here's where it gets visceral, a few drops of menstrual fluid. You're supposed to smear this mixture on a piece of linen, then fold it 7 times while repeating the name of your beloved with each fold. The magician who wrote this scroll charges you half a deben of copper, about a week's wages for the labourer. He's not a priest from the great temples. Those dignified men in leopard skins wouldn't be caught dead trafficking in love magic, at least not officially. No, this practitioner operates from a stall near the fish market, where the smell of Nile perch covers the scent of his stranger ingredients. He's got a reputation, though. Supposedly he reunited a carpenter with his estranged wife, and the baker's son finally won over that girl from the weaving workshop. Whether these testimonials are true or just ancient Yelp reviews written by his cousins, you'll never know. The ingredients themselves tell you something about Egyptian cosmology. Honey isn't just sweet, it's solar, associated with Ra's tears that fell to earth and became golden. Blood carries life force, what the Egyptians call Heka, the primal magic that gods used to create the world, and menstrual blood. That's doubly powerful because it represents both life potential and the mysterious cycles that mirror the moon's own rhythm. You're not just baking a cake here, you're assembling a cosmic battery meant to realign the invisible threads connecting 2 souls. But the papyrus scroll doesn't stop with ingredients. It gives you words to speak, a string of syllables that sound like nonsense to your modern ear. Aberamentu lethexanax zethreluo. Historians still argue whether these are corrupted god names, ancient passwords to the spirit realm, or just impressive sounding gibberish designed to make clients feel they're getting their money's worth. The magician tells you to say them 42 times, a sacred number, one for each nome of Egypt, though that explanation might also be marketing. You follow the instructions, you fold the linen, you speak the words until your tongue goes numb and the syllables blur into a kind of meditative drone. Then you're supposed to sleep as this talisman under your pillow for 3 nights, and on the 4th morning burn it on your doorstep just as the sun breaks the horizon. The smoke carries your intention to the gods, or to the subtle realm where thoughts become things, or possibly just into the neighbour's window where they'll complain about the smell. Does it work? Here's the thing that keeps these magicians in business. Sometimes it does. Not because the universe bends to properly pronounce gibberish, but because you've spent 4 days obsessing over this person. You've invested resources and ritual effort. And now you're walking around with the confidence of someone who believes the cosmic deck has been stacked in their favor. You smile more. You make eye contact at the market. You interpret every neutral interaction as a sign the spell is working. And occasionally your target notices this sudden surge of attentive energy and thinks, maybe I dismissed them too quickly. The ancient Egyptians understood this feedback loop better than you'd think. Their word for magic, Heka, wasn't separate from medicine, psychology, or what we'd call charisma. It was all one thing, the art of making reality slightly more cooperative. A love spell wasn't supernatural. It was focused intention wrapped in symbolic action, the ancient equivalent of a self-help book crossed with a chemistry set. You find another papyrus, this one less recipe and more cautionary tale. A woman named Tor hired a magician to win back her husband, who'd taken up with a younger woman from Thebes. The spell called for mixing wine with powdered lizard, because lizards can regrow their tails, see, so they represent renewal and second chances. Tor was supposed to serve this doctored wine to her husband during the Feast of Hathor. The text doesn't tell you if it worked, but it does mention that Tor paid the magician 3 times before finally accepting that some hearts, once they've wandered, prefer to stay lost. Even ancient magic had its refund policy, apparently. These papyri pile up in museum collections, thousands of them, each one a glimpse into someone's private desperation. You realize that love spells outnumber cursing spells by about 3 to 1, which says something oddly hopeful about human nature. Most people, even 3,000 years ago, wanted to attract rather than destroy. They wanted the girl from the pottery shop to notice them, or the soldier returning from Nubia to remember why he fell in love in the first place. These aren't sorcerers summoning demons, they're just people trying to load the dice in the hardest game there is. You're learning quickly that in ancient Egypt your hair isn't just dead protein sprouting from your scalp. It's an antenna for your soul, a piece of your essence that remains dangerously you, even after it's been cut away. The priests at Karnak keep their heads shaved smooth, not for cleanliness but for protection, because every strand that falls is a potential weapon in someone else's hands. You watch a mother carefully collect her daughter's hair clippings after a trim, wrapping them in linen and burying them in the family courtyard where no stranger can reach. This isn't paranoia. This is basic spiritual hygiene in a world where sympathetic magic operates like contagion. The principle is simple and terrifying. Whatever happens to your hair happens to you. A magician who obtains even 3 or 4 strands can work spells that bypass every protective amulet you're wearing. He can tie the hairs around a wax figure and whatever he does to that figure, pin it with bronze needles, bury it in a jar of vinegar, burn it slowly over 3 nights. You'll feel as phantom sensations, as unexplained illnesses, as a sudden conviction that your limbs are weighted with invisible chains. The Greek historian Herodotus, visiting Egypt in the 5th century BCE, noted with fascination that Egyptian barbers commanded enormous respect, not for their scissor skills but because they were custodians of dangerous materials. One dishonest barber could supply a curse maker with enough raw material to terrorize an entire neighborhood. But hair works both ways, and that's where love magic gets interesting. If you can curse someone through their hair, you can also bind them, attract them, make them dream of you in that delicious space between sleep and waking. A young woman in Memphis carefully saves a few strands her beloved left on a cushion after dozing in her family's courtyard. She takes them to a practitioner who weaves those strands together with some of her own, braiding them while reciting the names of gods associated with binding. Bees, the dwarf deity of households, and Taweret, the hippopotamus goddess who presides over fertility and protection. The braid becomes a tiny rope, no longer than your finger, and she sews it into the hem of her dress. Now, she walks around with her essence physically intertwined with his. She believes, and belief is half the mechanism here, that wherever she goes, he feels a subtle tug in her direction. If she passes his workshop, he looks up. If she speaks in a crowd, his attention swivels toward her voice. Historians still argue whether these hair-binding spells were considered ethical or manipulative by Egyptian standards. Some texts suggest that using someone's hair without permission was roughly equivalent to theft, while others treat it as fair game in love and war, the romantic equivalent of setting a really good trap. You find a spell recorded on a wooden tablet from the Middle Kingdom around 2000 BCE. The instructions tell you to take hair from the beloved, hair from yourself, and hair from a cat, because cats, being sacred to Bastet, goddess of love and joy, supposedly lend their irresistible nature to the working. You're meant to braid all three together, then wrap the braid around a small stone, preferably red jasper or carnelian, both associated with passion and blood. The packet gets buried at a crossroads at midnight, the logic being that crossroads are liminal spaces where the normal rules bend and magic flows more freely. The tablet includes a warning, though, scratched in smaller hieratic script at the bottom. Do not perform this working during the 5 epigomenal days, for those days belong to chaos and your spell may twist backward. The 5 epigomenal days are those weird extra days tacked onto the Egyptian calendar to make 365. They're considered outside normal time, unlucky, dangerous. You appreciate the specificity. Even ancient love magic had its OSHA regulations. There's something weirdly democratic about hair spells. Rich or poor, everyone grows hair, everyone sheds it, everyone is equally vulnerable. A nobleman's hair has no more magical potency than a farmer's. The Ka, the life force, plays no favourites based on social class. This probably explains why hair magic shows up at every level of Egyptian society. Archaeologists have found tiny braided charms in wealthy tombs and in the shallow graves of commoners alike. Love apparently makes equal opportunity magicians of everyone. You encounter a particularly strange practice. Lovers exchanging hair as tokens, but not just as keepsakes. They're exchanging insurance policies. If I give you my hair and you give me yours, we're both armed, both protected, and both vulnerable. Mutually assured affection, you might call it. Neither can work magic against the other without suffering the same effect. It's like a romantic Cold War détente played out in follicles. Some marriage contracts from the New Kingdom actually include clauses about the safekeeping of exchanged hair, stored in sealed containers witnessed by both families. If the marriage failed and things turned bitter, those containers were supposed to be opened together and the hair burned simultaneously, neutralizing the potential for magical retaliation. One papyrus from the Ptolemaic period describes a woman named Hanutmahit, who discovered that her rival had stolen some of her hair, probably bribed a servant to take clippings from her brush. Hanutmahit went to a priest, not a hedge magician, and paid for a counterspell. The priest made her an amulet containing her own hair sealed in gold, inscribed with protective formulas from the Book of the Dead. The idea was that her hair was now claimed by divine protection, and any magic worked on loose strands would slide off like water from oiled linen. Whether it worked or just gave her peace of mind, the text doesn't say. She did, however, marry the man both women were competing for, which the text presents as vindication. Or maybe he just preferred her personality. Funny how the sources never consider that possibility. You're starting to realize that hair magic sits at this intersection of intimacy and violation. Hair is something we shed unconsciously, leave on pillows and furniture, abandon in brushes without a second thought. In a world without DNA analysis, it was the most intimate biological sample you could obtain from someone. You could get someone's hair without breaking into their house, without violence, sometimes without them even knowing. Just wait until they visit, then check the cushions after they leave. This ease of access made hair simultaneously the most common ingredient in love spells and the most feared. Do you remember those fairy tales where witches demand a lock of hair as payment? That's not a weird European invention. It's ancient Egyptian wisdom surviving through cultural telephone across 3,000 years. The Grimm brothers didn't realise they were recording the echoes of Nilotic magic when they wrote about Rapunzel's impossibly long hair, giving the witch power over her. The tower, the isolation, the hair as both prison and connection. That's sympathetic magic 101 Egyptian edition. There's a darkly comic side to all this paranoia. You find medical texts that describe an epidemic of baldness among middle-aged men in Thebes during the reign of Amenhotep III. Physicians prescribed various treatments, castor oil, fenugreek paste, the fat of lions, because what's more aggressively hairy than a lion? But later commentaries suggest the baldness was self-inflicted. Men were shaving their heads completely, then wearing wigs in public to protect their actual hair from collection. The wigs were made from the hair of the dead purchased from undertakers, which carried no magical connection to the wearer. Imagine being so worried about love spells that you voluntarily go bald and wear someone else's hair as a disguise. Ancient Egypt, ladies and gentlemen, where even grooming choices were tactical decisions. You're watching a woman kneel in her courtyard as the sun drops behind the western cliffs, her hands working red wax into the shape of a man. Her fingers move with the grim efficiency of someone who's done this before, or at least watched it done, or paid enough attention when the magician explained the process. The wax comes from bees that fed on poppies, red flowers for red wax, the colour of blood and rage and Set, the god of chaos and deserts and everything that disrupts comfortable order. She's not trying to attract love anymore. That ship sailed when her husband took up with the perfume seller's wife. Now she wants justice, or revenge, or perhaps just the satisfaction of knowing he'll suffer a fraction of what she's endured. The figure takes shape. Crude head, lumpy torso, arms pressed against sides. She scratches his name into the chest with a bronze needle, the metal cold in the cooling evening. His name in hieratic script, each character carved deep enough to hold intention. Then she begins whispering, and you lean closer to hear words that sound like prayers but twisted, inverted, spoken with a venom that makes the air feel thicker. May his strength abandon him. May his manhood wither like grain in drought. May he lie beside her and feel nothing, be nothing, know the shame he has brought into my house. This is red wax magic, the dark cousin of honey and hair binding spells. Where attraction magic works through sweetness and connection, destruction magic operates through sympathy and severance. The Egyptians understood that love and hate use the same tools, names, images, physical links, but point them in opposite directions. A love spell says draw near, a curse says collapse inward. The magical technology is identical, only the intention differs. She carries the figure to a cooking fire, but she doesn't simply toss it in. That would be too quick, too merciful. Instead, she holds it at the edge of the flames, letting the heat soften the wax slowly. First the feet begin to droop, then the legs bend at unnatural angles. She's chanting the whole time, a rhythmic muttering that probably sounds insane to anyone passing in the street. But her neighbours have learned not to comment on what happens in a wronged woman's courtyard after dark. The Egyptians had a very practical attitude toward domestic revenge magic. Don't ask questions, don't get involved, hope it's not you next time. As the figure melts, she names what she's melting. His desire melts, his power melts, his ability to please her melts away like wax under Ra's eye. Historians still argue whether these spells were meant metaphorically, or if practitioners genuinely believed they could cause impotence and madness through sympathetic resonance. The medical papyri suggest impotence was common enough, blamed on everything from too much beer to scorpion stings to angry spirits. So a man suddenly experiencing difficulties might very well wonder if an ex-lover had worked magic against him. And that fear, that psychosomatic conviction, might actually manifest the curse. The mind is a suggestible creature. Tell it that it's cursed and watch it helpfully fulfill the prophecy. The next phase involves burying the melted wax. She scrapes the blob from the fire's edge, careful not to burn herself because practical concerns don't vanish just because you're performing ancient curses, and wraps it in a scrap of linen stained with something dark. Menstrual blood again, but used differently this time. In attraction magic, menstrual blood represents life and fertility. In curse work, it becomes a symbol of pollution and taboo, the substance that makes priests temporarily unfit for temple service. Context is everything in magical thinking. She buries the packet at midnight in a cemetery just outside the city walls. Not in a fresh grave. That would be disrespectful to the deceased and might anger their guardian spirits. But in a older section where the sand has reclaimed most of the markers. The logic is delicious in its symmetry. The dead are separated from the living, cut off from earthly pleasures, and so by burying the wax figure among them, you're consigning your target to that same separation. He'll walk among the living but feel dead to pleasure, numb to the touch that once excited him. It's poetic, really, in a deeply vindictive sort of way. You find dozens of these buried curse figures during archaeological excavations. They turn up in cemeteries, under doorsteps, at crossroads, occasionally at the bottom of wells. Some are pierced with bronze needles. 13 needles seems to be the favourite number, possibly because 13 lunar months make a year, or possibly because it just looks dramatically cursed. Others are bound with thread wrapped so tightly the wax squeezes out between the threads like flesh bulging around rope. A few have been found with their heads twisted backward, a gesture that supposedly reverses the victim's fortune, turns their world literally upside down. The truly elaborate curses include written spells rolled up and inserted into the wax figure like a scroll stuffed into a bottle. One example from Saqqara, dating to the late period, contains a tiny lead sheet inscribed with what reads like a lawyer's contract from hell. I call upon the demons of the West, the spirits of the restless dead, the servants of Sekhmet who bring plague. Take this man whose name is written here, Jedi son of Merisank, and afflict him with burning in his loins, weakness in his limbs, confusion in his thoughts, until he knows that the gods favour those who keep their oaths. Apparently Jedi had promised to marry this woman and then changed his mind. Ancient Egypt, where breach of promise could result in demonic litigation. But here's the weird part, some of these curse figures have been found with counter-curse figures beside them. Imagine, someone works a red wax spell against you, so you hire your own magician to work a red wax spell against them, and both figures end up buried in the same cemetery, possibly by rival practitioners who know each other and have a professional respect for symmetry. It's magical arms races all the way down, everyone cursing everyone else until the whole city must have been walking around, convinced they were hexed. Which raises the question, if everyone thinks they're cursed, and therefore everyone's suffering misfortunes that they attribute to magic, is anyone actually cursed? Or is this just life with a supernatural explanation track? The priests officially frowned on curse magic. Temple inscriptions are full of warnings against Hekau, harmful magic, and the penalties for practicing it. One stela from Karnak threatens that anyone caught working curses will be given to the flames, consumed as these enemies of Ra are consumed. But the same priests who carved those warnings also sold protective amulets to defend against curses, which suggests a certain cognitive dissonance, or possibly just savvy business sense. Condemn the practice publicly, profit from the fear privately. Some things never change. You notice that red wax spells come with their own set of superstitions about backfire. If you work a curse and pronounce even one syllable of the god names incorrectly, the spell supposedly reverses and hits you instead. If you perform the ritual while harbouring doubt, the magic scatters like startled birds and might land anywhere. And if the person you're cursing is protected by stronger magic than yours, better amulets, purer priest, divine favour, then the curse bounces back doubled. It's like cosmic karma with a lag time. These warnings probably served a useful social function. They made people think twice before casually cursing their neighbours, because who wants to risk accidentally cursing themselves? Still, the woman in the courtyard finishes her work, brushes the dirt from her hands, and walks back to her house with the grim satisfaction of someone who's done what needed doing. Whether the curse works, or whether her husband's difficulties stem from age, anxiety, or just the universe's indifference to human drama, she'll never know for certain. But she'll watch, she'll listen for rumours. And if word reaches her that the perfume seller's wife is suddenly complaining that her new man seems distracted, distant, incapable, well, the woman will smile quietly to herself and feel that perhaps the old gods still listen, still care, still tilt the scales toward those who've been wronged. You're joining a long line of pilgrims trudging south along the Nile toward Dendera, where the great temple of Hathor rises against the sky like a promise carved in stone. The journey takes 4 days from Memphis, and your feet have developed blisters that make each step a small negotiation with pain. But you keep walking because matters of the heart don't wait for comfortable circumstances. Around you, others carry similar burdens. A merchant whose wife has grown cold after 15 years of marriage, a young scribe who dreams nightly of a woman he's only glimpsed twice at market, an older widow hoping to know if she'll find companionship again before age makes the question irrelevant. Hathor is the goddess of love, music, drunkenness, and joy. Basically everything that makes life worth tolerating between the planting and the harvest. Her temple at Dendera is famous throughout Egypt for its oracle, where priestesses interpret dreams and dispense romantic advice that's 1 part divine wisdom, 2 parts ancient common sense, and 3 parts whatever placebo effect can be generated by walking 4 days to consult a woman wearing a cowhorn headdress. But you're desperate, and desperation has its own economy. You've saved for 6 months to afford the consultation fee and the offering. A jar of honey because Hathor appreciates sweetness in all its forms. The temple complex overwhelms you as you approach. Columns thick as ancient trees hold up a ceiling painted with stars and celestial figures, their colours still vibrant despite centuries of incense smoke and tourist prayers. You're ushered into a waiting courtyard where petitioners sit on stone benches, some nervous, some drowsy from the journey. One woman openly weeping into her hands while her companion pats her shoulder, with the mechanical sympathy of someone who's been doing this for hours. A priest circulates with beer, weak beer, ceremonial beer, the kind that loosens tongues without loosening bowels, and asks everyone to speak their questions aloud to prepare the goddess to receive your concerns. When your turn comes, you're led through a side passage into a smaller chamber lit by oil lamps. The priestess waiting there is younger than you expected, perhaps 30, with the kind of direct gaze that makes you feel simultaneously seen and evaluated. She wears white linen and a heavy pectoral necklace of gold and turquoise shaped like a menat, Hathor's sacred instrument. She gestures for you to sit on a cushion across from her and asks, without preamble, "Tell me your dream." This is how the oracle works. You're expected to have received a dream, or to claim you did, and the priestess interprets its symbols according to a vast mental library of associations built up over decades of training. If you haven't actually dreamed anything relevant, you're encouraged to sleep in the temple's special dream incubation chamber, a small room where the air is thick with kai-fi, a sacred incense made from honey, wine, raisins, and about 15 other ingredients that may or may not be mildly psychoactive. After a night breathing that smoke, most people dream vividly enough to give the priestess something to work with. You describe your dream. You were walking through a garden, but all the flowers were wilting, and when you tried to water them, the water turned to sand in your hands. The priestess nods slowly, her face neutral. The garden is your heart's desire, and the wilting flowers show that your approach lacks proper nourishment. The water becoming sand suggests you're trying too hard with the wrong methods. Force where gentleness is needed, or perhaps pursuing someone whose nature is fundamentally incompatible with yours. Hathor asks, Are you watering flowers or trying to water the desert? It's maddeningly vague and absolutely specific at the same time, the hallmark of good oracle work across every culture that's ever practiced it. You could apply that interpretation to almost any romantic problem, but somehow it feels tailored precisely to your situation. Historians still argue whether these priestesses were genuinely channeling divine insight, or just extremely skilled cold readers who'd heard 10,000 variations of "Why doesn't he love me back?" and learned to spot patterns. The answer is probably both. They believed in their gift, which made them better at it, which reinforced their belief in a self-sustaining loop of conviction and confirmation. But the priestess doesn't stop at interpretation. She prescribes action, and this is where temple oracle work gets wonderfully specific. For your wilting garden dream, she recommends a 3-part remedy. First, you're to procure a specific type of lotus, blue lotus, not white, and sleep with the dried petals under your pillow for 7 nights to open the pathways of attraction. Second, you're to bathe in water that has been blessed by the temple, which you can purchase in sealed jars from the priests in the outer courtyard. A convenient upsell, you notice, but the jars are reasonably priced. Third, and most importantly, you're to stop actively pursuing your beloved for 1 full lunar month. Let them see your absence, the priestess says. Often the heart learns its own mind only when confronted with emptiness. That last bit is actually brilliant psychology dressed in religious authority. You've probably been coming on too strong, too available, and the priestess has identified this from your dream and demeanor. The prescription to back off gives your target space to miss you while simultaneously preserving your dignity. But because it comes from Hathor's oracle, you'll actually follow the advice instead of dismissing it as obvious. People will believe a goddess where they'd ignore a friend saying the exact same thing. Other petitioners receive different prescriptions. The merchant with the cold wife is told to commission a song, literally hire musicians to compose and perform a piece praising her beauty and patience, and to present it to her during the next festival of Hathor. The subtext is, you've stopped courting her, stopped making her feel desired, and grand gestures matter. The young scribe obsessed with the market girl is told, more bluntly, that his dreams show confusion between love and obsession, and he's prescribed a purification ritual involving natron salt and a stern warning about respecting boundaries. Not every oracle session ends with encouragement. Sometimes the goddess says no through her priestesses. The temple also offers a more expensive service, the dream incubation chamber with direct overnight access. You pay a much steeper fee and you're allowed to sleep in a small room adjacent to Hathor's sanctuary, breathing that Kaifai smoke, your head resting on a headrest carved with protective symbols. The theory is that sleeping so close to the goddess's presence makes your dreams especially potent and clear. In practice, you're probably getting a mild hallucinogenic experience from the incense, plus the suggestibility that comes from spending a fortune and sleeping in a sacred space. But the dreams people report are remarkably consistent. Visions of Hathor herself appearing as a woman, a cow, or sometimes a hybrid of both, speaking in a voice that feels ancient and immediate at once. One papyrus records a woman named Neferti, who underwent the dream incubation ritual. She was trying to choose between 2 suitors, one wealthy but unkind, one poor but devoted. In her dream, Hathor appeared as a cow licking a calf, then turned to Neferti and said, "Wealth without warmth is gold wrapped around a stone. Choose the one who would lick your wounds." When Neferti woke and reported this to the priestess, she was told the message was clear: choose devotion over status. Neferti married the poor man, and according to the papyrus they lived contentedly, which either means the oracle worked or Neferti's story was recorded as temple advertising, probably both. The oracle chamber maintains dream journals, papyrus scrolls where petitioners' dreams and interpretations are recorded for posterity and pattern analysis. These texts reveal recurring symbols. Crocodiles usually mean danger or deception, ibises suggest messages or communication, cats indicate independence or feminine power, Snakes are transformative but ambiguous. The priestesses study these journals as part of their training, learning the symbolic language that lets them decode the unconscious messages bubbling up from petitioners' minds. It's an entire system of proto-psychology operating under the framework of divine consultation. You leave the temple with your prescriptions, your blessed water, and a lighter purse. But there's something else too. A sense of having been heard, witnessed, taken seriously. Maybe that's the real magic of the oracle. Not predicting the future, but giving people permission to take their emotional lives seriously, to see their romantic struggles as worthy of ritual, investment, and divine attention. In a world where most of life is grinding agricultural labour punctuated by disease and political instability, love at least gets to be sacred, complex, important enough to walk 4 days and spend 6 months' savings consulting a woman in a cow horn crown. You're holding a length of linen cord, undyed and rough, between your fingers, while a magician with coal-lined eyes explains the binding ritual with the patience of someone who's given this lecture 100 times before. 7 knots, he says, each one tied while speaking a name. Not the beloved's name, but the names of 7 deities who govern different aspects of connection and constraint. The first knot for Isis, who bound together the scattered pieces of Osiris, the second for Nephthys, her shadow sister, the third for Hathor, of course, because no love magic omits the goddess of desire, and so on through Bees, Taweret, Ptah, and finally Amun, the hidden one, because some aspects of love remain mysterious even when you've invoked 6 other gods. The principle behind knot magic is elegantly simple. As you tie the physical knot, you're simultaneously tying an invisible knot in the fabric of fate that connects you to your target. Each knot is a point of binding, a place where their will becomes just a little less free, a little more inclined toward you. The Egyptians didn't see this as ethical violation, or rather they did, but they also saw it as fair play in the chaotic arena of romance. After all, people fall in love without choosing to all the time. You're just helping the process along, giving fate a nudge in your preferred direction. The magician hands you the cord and watches as you tie the first knot, fumbling slightly because your hands are shaking with a mix of nervousness and excitement. Tighter, he instructs. The knot must hold. Loose binding is worthless binding. It's like whispering when you should shout. You pull the cord until your fingers ache, until the fibres compress into a hard little nub. As you tie, you're supposed to visualize your beloved's face, their voice, the way they move through space. You're not just tying string, you're tying memory, attention, the invisible threads that already connect you whether they acknowledge it or not. Between each knot you walk 7 steps counterclockwise, against the sun's motion, which the magician explains is necessary for drawing things toward you rather than pushing them away. Clockwise motion disperses and releases. Counterclockwise motion gathers and binds. It's the same logic that governs stirring potions or circling temples, and you've stopped questioning whether it's real or symbolic because at this point, does the distinction even matter? You're performing actions that focus your intention to a laser point, and intention, you're learning, is its own kind of force. By the 7th knot, your arms are tired and your mind has entered that strange state somewhere between meditation and obsession. The magician nods approval and tells you the cord must now be kept close to your body for 9 days. Tucked in your belt if you're a man, sewn into your dress hem if you're a woman. You're essentially carrying your spell around, keeping it in your personal energy field, letting it charge with your body heat and your constant proximity. After 9 days, you're to bury the cord at a threshold, a doorway, a gate, any boundary between one space and another, because thresholds are inherently magical, places where transformations happen and ordinary rules bend slightly. Knot magic appears throughout Egyptian culture in forms both sacred and profane. Priests tie special knots in their ceremonial garments, knots that supposedly protect them during temple rituals when they're handling dangerous divine energies. Women in childbirth wear amulets featuring the Tayet, Isis's knot, to ensure safe delivery and invoke the goddess's protective presence. And lovers, well, lovers tie knots hoping to bind hearts that might otherwise drift away like papyrus boats on the current. You find references to knot magic in the pyramid texts, some of the oldest religious writings in human history. One spell describes tying knots to bind the wandering heart, to keep the beloved from straying beyond the sound of your voice. Another, darker text speaks of tying knots to confuse the enemy's purpose, to tangle their thoughts like thread in an unskilled hand. The technology is neutral. The intention determines whether you're working love magic or curse work. Same knots, different prayers, opposite outcomes. Historians still argue about whether these spells had standardized forms, or whether each magician developed their own variations. The archaeological evidence suggests both. There seem to be common structures, 7 knots, 9 days, threshold burial, but also wild variations. Some cords are found dyed red with madder root. Others are green with malachite. A few are black, which probably indicates particularly binding or restrictive magic. The kind meant not just to attract, but to absolutely prevent the beloved from even considering other options. Those black cord spells make you uncomfortable even across 3,000 years. They feel less like love magic and more like magical kidnapping. One papyrus describes a particularly elaborate knot ritual involving 3 cords braided together, one from your clothing, one from the beloved's clothing obtained through stealth or bribery, and one from the temple, blessed by a priest. The 3-cord braid represents the sacred triangle, you, them, and the divine witness, making it legitimate. You tie 7 knots in this braid while reciting a spell that translates roughly to, "As these cords are bound, so are our fates intertwined. As I cannot untie this knot with my breath, so they cannot escape my desire with their will. What is woven in the gods' presence stays woven until the gods themselves choose to cut the thread." The last line is interesting because it includes an exit clause. The gods can end this binding if they choose. It suggests even aggressive love magic maintained some sense that divine will supersedes human manipulation. You're allowed to try binding someone, but you're also acknowledging that if the universe fundamentally opposes this pairing, your string tricks won't ultimately override cosmic judgment, is magical practice with theological humility baked in. But here's something that doesn't appear in the official magical papyri, but shows up in trial records from the New Kingdom. Accusations of illegal binding. A woman in Thebes was brought before a local magistrate and accused by her neighbours of binding not 1 but 3 men simultaneously, keeping them all magically tethered and confused about why they couldn't commit to anyone else. The charge was essentially magical fraud, preventing these men from making free choices about their lives. The trial record doesn't give us the verdict, frustratingly, but it does confirm that Egyptians recognized a line between acceptable love magic and unacceptable manipulation, even if that line was fuzzy and context-dependent. The same trial records mention professional knot cutters, people you could hire to undo bindings worked against you. They performed counter-rituals involving cutting cords while reciting spells of release and freedom. Imagine the economic ecosystem here. Magicians selling binding services, counter-magicians selling unbinding services, probably some enterprising folks selling both depending on who was paying. It's magical services as a market economy, complete with specialists, competition, and presumably some practitioners who were complete frauds and others who genuinely believed in their craft. Do you remember tying knots in your shoelaces as a child, the simple satisfaction of making a loop and pulling it tight? The Egyptians took that basic human action, binding things together, and elevated it into a cosmic principle. Everything in their worldview was about order versus chaos, binding versus loosening, Mat versus Isfet. Knot magic was just one more expression of humanity's fundamental desire to impose order on the chaotic randomness of attraction, to make love behave like a rope you can coil and store and retrieve when needed, rather than the wild, untamable thing it actually is. You finish tying your 7 knots, and the magician wraps the cord in a clean piece of linen, hands it back to you with a solemn expression. "Guard it carefully," he says. "If it's lost, the binding scatters. If another person finds it and unties the knots, the spell reverses and binds you instead. And if a dog eats it, well, I've seen that happen twice, and both times were deeply awkward for everyone involved." You're not sure if he's joking about the dog, but you clutch the packet close anyway, already planning where in your belt you'll tuck it to keep it safe for the required 9 days. You're standing in a workshop that smells like death and grease, watching a physician grind crocodile fat into a paste with the businesslike efficiency of someone who's done this so often the absurdity no longer registers. The mortar is stone, worn smooth from years of pulverizing bizarre ingredients, and the pestle makes a rhythmic scraping sound that's almost meditative if you can ignore what's actually being pulverized. Beside the mortar sits a clay jar labelled in hieratic script: "Fat of crocodile, testicles preferred, harvested 3rd month of Shomu." You're trying not to think too hard about the supply chain that makes this ingredient available in a Memphis pharmacy. The physician explains the logic while he works, his tone suggesting he's had this conversation before with skeptical customers. "Crocodiles," he says, "are apex predators, fearless, powerful, sexually vigorous, capable of taking down prey much larger than themselves. They represent raw predatory energy, the kind of aggressive confidence that attracts mates and dominates rivals. By consuming crocodile essence, you're meant to absorb those qualities, to become metaphorically more crocodile-like in your romantic pursuits. It's sympathetic magic meets nutritional supplement, and judging by the number of jars in his workshop, business is steady. He mixes the crocodile fat with honey, always honey because apparently no Egyptian spell or medicine is complete without it, plus powdered lotus seeds and something he calls the dust of Set's red land, which is probably just ochre-rich sand from the desert. The resulting paste looks disturbingly organic, brownish pink and glistening. He scoops it into a smaller jar and hands it to you with instructions. Eat 1 spoonful at sunrise for 7 consecutive days, and on the 7th day approach your beloved with confidence. The crocodile essence will supposedly make you bold, magnetic, impossible to refuse. You wonder, not for the first time, how these recipes were developed. Did someone once eat crocodile fat on a hunch and happen to have romantic success the next day, then attribute causation? Did priests experiment systematically testing different animal fats and recording results? Or did the whole thing emerge from the symbolic logic that if crocodiles are powerful, crocodile parts must confer power, and someone just started selling the idea until it became accepted wisdom? Historians still argue about the origins of these bizarre materia medica, whether they're empirical discoveries wrapped in magical thinking or pure symbolic action, with no basis beyond belief. But crocodile fat is just the beginning of Egyptian animal-based aphrodisiacs. The physician's shelf holds an entire bestiary of desire. Hippopotamus tooth powder for virility because hippos are famously aggressive and territorial about mating. Goose fat for attractiveness, because geese were sacred to Amun and also because they're loud and impossible to ignore. Qualities apparently desirable in courtship. The semen of bulls mixed with wine, which doesn't bear thinking about too closely but supposedly transfers bovine fertility to human consumers. And perhaps most optimistically, the heart of a hoopoe bird, dried and powdered, meant to make you irresistible because hoopos have spectacular crests and seem to attract attention effortlessly. Each ingredient comes with its own price point and alleged potency. Crocodile fat is mid-range, expensive enough to feel significant but not so costly that ordinary people can't afford it for special occasions. The bull semen concoction is cheaper, probably because bulls are domestic animals, and the collection process, however disturbing, is at least feasible. The hoopoe heart is extravagantly expensive because hoopos are wild birds, difficult to catch, and their hearts are tiny. You'd need several birds to accumulate enough powder for a single dose. The physician admits, when pressed, that he sometimes substitutes dove hearts and trusts that intention and belief carry more weight than exact ingredients. There's a whole category of aphrodisiacs specifically for women, and here the animal logic shifts. Instead of predatory power, these recipes emphasize receptivity, fertility, and attractive softness. Gazelle milk mixed with dates, because gazelles are graceful and gentle. The eggs of certain fish, because eggs equal fertility in the most literal sense. Fat from a white dove, because doves are sacred to Hathor, and also because they're soft, domestic, and associated with cooing and nesting. All qualities the recipes seem to think women should embody to attract men. You notice the gender politics embedded in the ingredient choices. Men get to be crocodiles, women get to be gazelles. It's sympathetic magic encoding social norms. One particularly strange prescription calls for the dried tongue of a bullfrog, worn as an amulet rather than consumed. The logic: bullfrogs call incessantly during mating season, their voices carrying across entire marshes, impossible to ignore. Wearing the frog's tongue supposedly makes your own words more compelling, more seductive, more likely to bypass the beloved's defences and lodge directly in their mind. A woman in the market wears one on a cord around her neck, half hidden beneath her collar, and she swears it's why customers always remember her, why men pause at her stall even when they need nothing she sells. The physician tells you about his strangest request: a nobleman who wanted lion semen, having heard it was the most potent aphrodisiac imaginable. The physician had to explain that obtaining lion semen was logistically somewhat problematic, and also possibly fatal for whoever attempted the collection. The nobleman offered increasingly absurd amounts of money until the physician finally relented and provided him with cat semen dyed red with henna, betting that the nobleman wouldn't know the difference and that belief would do the actual work. Apparently it worked magnificently, which the physician recounts with the satisfied air of someone who understands that medical practice is as much about psychology as biochemistry. But some of these animal ingredients might actually have had physiological effects beyond placebo. Modern analysis of crocodile fat shows it's rich in unusual fatty acids that could potentially affect hormone production, though whether eating a spoonful would produce noticeable changes is debatable. Lotus seeds contain compounds that are mildly psychoactive and mood-elevating, not enough to get you high, but possibly enough to make you feel more relaxed and confident. The physicians weren't complete charlatans. They were observing effects and building theories to explain them, even if those theories involved sympathetic magic rather than endocrinology. You encounter a darker side of this trade in a papyrus that describes using animal ingredients not to enhance desire but to eliminate it. Chemical castration via folk medicine. The gallbladder of a crocodile, consumed by an unfaithful husband, supposedly caused impotence as punishment. The blood of a bat mixed into wine could make someone lose all sexual interest. Useful if you wanted a rival removed from competition without actual murder. These recipes blur the line between medicine and curse work, and you wonder how many wives slipped bat blood into their wandering husbands' cups, calling it medicine while thinking of it as justice. The physician wraps your jar of crocodile paste carefully and reminds you to keep it sealed and cool. Apparently rancid crocodile fat smells even worse than fresh crocodile fat, which seems difficult to imagine. As you're leaving, he calls after you, "Remember, the crocodile gives you boldness, not wisdom. Don't confuse the two." It's possibly the most sensible advice you've received in this entire magical education. Power without judgment is just chaos with extra steps, whether you're a crocodile or a lovesick human smearing predator fat on your breakfast bread. You're learning to read the sky's rhythms the way a farmer reads clouds, because Egyptian love magic operates on a calendar measured in lunar crescents and dark moon nights. The magician you're consulting this week, a different one because apparently you're comparison shopping for cosmic intervention, spreads a papyrus calendar across his table and taps specific dates with one yellowed fingernail. "Here," he says, pointing to the full moon falling in the month of Hathor, This is when attraction magic burns brightest. The moon's face is complete, reflecting Ra's light fully, and Hathor dances in the sky. Any binding worked on this night carries triple potency. The moon, he explains, governs all things cyclical: tides, menstruation, the flooding of the Nile, and the waxing and waning of human desire. When the moon grows from crescent to full, you work magic that increases, attracts, draws toward you. Your spells during this phase are about accumulation, accumulating interest, attention, affection, eventual commitment. The growing light mirrors growing connection. You time your honey and hair spells, your knot bindings, your crocodile fat consumption to coincide with the moon's expansion, riding that cosmic wave of increase. But when the moon wanes, shrinking from full back to darkness, that's when you work different magic entirely. These are the nights for banishing rivals, for cutting unwanted attachments, for curse work and separation spells. As the moon decreases, so do the things you target: a rival's influence, an ex-lover's hold on someone's heart, your own obsessive thoughts if you've decided this whole pursuit was a mistake from the start. The dark moon, that night when no moon is visible at all, is the most powerful time for destructive magic, when the boundary between the living world and the realm of the dead grows thin and dangerous forces can be invoked with less resistance. The magician shows you a lunar calendar marked with annotations in red and black ink. Red marks the auspicious days, full moons, new moons, the first crescent after darkness. Black marks the dangerous days, eclipses, certain combinations of lunar phase and planetary positions that supposedly create cosmic turbulence where magic can backfire spectacularly. Never work love magic during an eclipse, he warns. The shadow crossing the moon or sun represents forces beyond human control. Your spell will twist, become something you didn't intend, bind you when you meant to bind another. You find this lunar timing built into almost every spell you encounter. A papyrus from the Ptolemaic period contains a love spell that must be performed on the first night the moon returns after darkness, when the crescent is thin as a bronze blade. The symbolism is layered. The returning moon represents new beginnings, and thin crescents suggest vulnerability, openness, the perfect time to slip your intention into someone's consciousness before their defenses fully fall. Another spell requires waiting for the full moon in the month of Farmuthi, specifically because that month is sacred to Renenutet, the cobra goddess of harvest and nourishment, and her favour supposedly enhances any magic worked for increase and abundance. But it's not just the moon you're tracking. The Egyptians paid attention to planetary movements too, though their astronomy was more poetic than precise. Venus, the bright wanderer that appears as both morning and evening star, is particularly important for love magic because she's associated with Hathor in her aspect as celestial goddess. When Venus is visible at sunset, hanging in the western sky like a diamond on dark linen, that's considered ideal timing for attraction spells. The evening star represents desire at day's end, the longing that intensifies when work is done and people return to their private thoughts. Historians still argue about how much of this timing was genuine astronomical observation versus symbolic storytelling. Did the Egyptians actually track Venus's movements with enough precision to schedule spells accordingly, or did they just look up, see a bright star, and decide tonight was auspicious? The answer probably varies by practitioner. Temple astronomers definitely tracked celestial movements with impressive accuracy. They needed precise calendars for religious festivals and Nile flood predictions. But the hedge magician working out of a stall near the fish market might have just eyeballed the moon and called it close enough. The agricultural calendar intersects with magical timing in interesting ways. Planting season, when farmers push seeds into Nile-moistened soil, is considered excellent for initiating new relationships. You're literally working with the earth's fertility, and the timing transfers to human affairs. Harvest season, when the fruits of long labour finally emerge, is good for bringing a long courtship to conclusion, for finally securing commitment after months of careful tending. But the season of drought, When the Nile is low and the land cracks with thirst, that's terrible timing for any love magic because desperation and scarcity pervade the cosmic atmosphere. You'll only attract relationships built on the same parched neediness. One spell you encounter includes absurdly specific timing. Perform this working on the 3rd day after the full moon in the month of Tibi, at the hour when the shadow of a standing man measures 3 times his height, but only if the wind blows from the north. You're not sure whether this precision increases magical effectiveness, or whether it's just a way to delay action indefinitely while claiming you're waiting for perfect conditions. Maybe that's the secret purpose. The elaborate timing requirements give you something to focus on besides your anxiety, and by the time all conditions are met, you've either moved on or developed the confidence to approach your beloved without magical assistance. The 5 epigomenal days, those weird extra days outside the normal calendar, carry special warnings in every magical text. These are the birthdays of Osiris, Horus, Set, Isis, and Nephthys, days when the gods were born and when normal cosmic order was still being established. Nothing done on these days can be trusted to unfold normally. Work a love spell during the epigomenal period, and you might end up attracting someone completely wrong for you, or binding yourself to someone through obligation rather than genuine affection, or triggering a cascade of chaos that makes everyone involved miserable. The magicians are unanimous. Just wait 6 days. Whatever romantic emergency you think you have can survive 6 days of enforced patience. There's something almost meditative about this enforced waiting for correct timing. You can't just impulsively decide to work magic tonight because you saw your beloved talking to someone else at the market and jealousy is eating you alive. You have to check the calendar, consult the moon, wait for the proper phase and season and planetary alignment. This delay builds in a cooling-off period, a chance to reconsider whether magical intervention is really necessary or whether you're just reacting to insecurity and fear. The cosmic timing requirements serve as a kind of magical regulatory waiting period, like buying a weapon but having to wait 3 days before taking possession. Do you remember waiting for Christmas as a child? How the anticipation stretched time and made the waiting almost more intense than the event itself? Egyptian love magic creates similar temporal tension. You're fixated on a specific future moment when conditions will be perfect, when the cosmos aligns with your desire, when your spell can finally be released into the universe with maximum potency. That anticipation focuses your intention, keeps the beloved constantly in your thoughts, maintains your emotional investment across weeks or months. By the time the right night arrives, you're so charged with focused longing that the spell almost doesn't need magical power. You've become a walking battery of concentrated desire, and the ritual is just the discharge mechanism. The magician rolls up his lunar calendar and fixes you with a serious look. Right timing matters more than perfect ingredients, he says. I've seen spells with mediocre components work beautifully because the moon was right, and elaborate spells with expensive materials fail completely because someone was impatient and worked them on the wrong night. The cosmos has rhythms. Learn to dance with them rather than against them, and you'll find magic flows like the Nile during inundation, abundant, life-giving, impossible to resist. You're holding a small ceramic jar, its contents sloshing slightly as you try not to think too hard about what you're carrying. The magician who prepared this particular love potion assured you it was traditional, time-tested, absolutely guaranteed to work if applied correctly. The recipe involves wine, that part's fine, mixed with honey, also acceptable, and then things take a sharp turn into territory that makes you grateful for the jar's seal. Your own urine collected first thing in the morning when it's most concentrated, 3 drops of honey from bees that fed exclusively on lotus flowers, and saliva gathered after chewing mint leaves to purify the mouth essence. The logic, as explained by the magician with a perfectly straight face, is that bodily fluids carry your personal essence more powerfully than anything else. Hair is good, blood is better, but fluids that flow from your body daily, especially those connected to speech, digestion, and excretion, contain your most current and vital energy. Mixing them with honey sweetens your essence, makes it palatable both literally and metaphorically. The wine serves as both solvent and carrier, diluting the mixture enough that your target won't immediately notice they're drinking something that spent time in a ceramic jar in your bedroom. The application method is where this gets socially complicated. You're supposed to add a small amount of this potion to your beloved's drink during a shared meal. Not so much that they taste something off, just enough to introduce your essence into their body, where it can supposedly work from the inside. The theory is almost viral. Once your essence is physically inside them, it establishes a sympathetic connection that makes them more receptive to your presence, your voice, your eventual romantic advances. You're essentially trying to infect them with attraction. This raises obvious questions about consent and ethics, questions that apparently didn't trouble ancient Egyptian practitioners as much as they trouble you. The magical papyri treat this kind of covert dosing as standard practice, no different from wearing perfume or choosing flattering clothing, just another tool in the arsenal of attraction. But you're standing here with a jar of your own bodily fluids thinking about slipping it into someone's wine, and even across 3,000 years of cultural difference, it feels deeply invasive. Then again, the whole enterprise of love magic is invasive if you think about it too hard, trying to override someone's free choice through supernatural manipulation. Some recipes are even more elaborate and less dignified. One papyrus describes mixing menstrual blood with beer, then using that mixture to bake bread that you serve to the intended target. The bread becomes a kind of Trojan horse, carrying your essence past their conscious defenses and directly into their digestive system, where it supposedly merges with their own body chemistry and creates irresistible attraction. Another recipe calls for sweat collected after vigorous activity, preferably after dancing during a religious festival, mixed with crushed coriander and lotus oil, then rubbed onto the rim of a cup before serving. The urine and honey mixture appears frequently enough in surviving texts that it must have been genuinely popular, or at least commonly prescribed. Historians still argue about whether people actually used these potions, or whether they were more aspirational, recipes that circulated as possibilities but that most people found too disgusting to implement. The archaeological record doesn't help much. It's not like bodily fluid potions leave distinctive traces in the soil. But the sheer number of recipes and the detailed instructions suggest at least some practitioners took this seriously. You encounter a medical text that warns against consuming such mixtures, which implies people were worried about being unknowingly dosed. The physician writes that if you suspect your drink has been tampered with by those who seek to bind your will, consume milk and dates to purge the foreign essence, then wear the amulet of Bastet to prevent such intrusions in future. So there's a whole counter-industry built around detecting and neutralizing these love potions, a magical arms race between those trying to dose people and those trying to avoid being dosed. There's dark comedy in imagining Egyptian social gatherings, where everyone is mildly paranoid about their drinks. Your host offers wine, and you have to decide, is this just wine? Or has someone in this house been consulting magicians? Do you trust the person handing you this cup, or do you politely decline and cite a stomach ailment? The social fabric must have been riddled with tiny suspicions, each person wondering whether their sudden attraction to someone was genuine or chemically induced through mystical means. But not all bodily fluid magic requires secrecy. Some spells instruct you to anoint yourself with the mixture, effectively using your own essence as a perfume or attractant. You mix urine with fragrant oils, let the liquid evaporate slightly to concentrate it, then dab it on pulse points before encountering your beloved. The theory is that you're amplifying your natural scent with your distilled essence, creating an attraction field that operates below conscious awareness. It's pheromone theory before anyone knew what pheromones were, dressed up in magical language but possibly stumbling towards a real phenomenon. One particularly optimistic spell promises results from something called the Water of Passion, which involves collecting the water you've bathed in, water that's touched every part of your body, and mixing it with wine and honey. You're supposed to sprinkle this around your doorway so that when your beloved crosses the threshold, they're literally walking through your essence, absorbing it through their feet. It's territorial marking disguised as hospitality, the magical equivalent of a cat rubbing against furniture to claim ownership. The honey component appears in almost every recipe because honey is the universal sweetener, metaphorically and literally. It makes bitter things palatable, transforms medicine into something almost pleasant. You're using honey to sweeten your essence, to make your urine wine mixture or your menstrual beer concoction into something that won't immediately trigger disgust. Honey is doing double duty, symbolic sweetening of your personality and intentions, plus practical disguising of flavors that would otherwise make anyone suspicious. Do you remember the first time someone offered you a drink and you wondered for just a moment whether you should trust it? That instinct, that tiny pause before accepting, is ancient, coded into human behavior by thousands of years of people occasionally putting things in other people's drinks. The Egyptians were doing it with love magic, but the underlying dynamic is timeless. The vulnerability of consuming something you didn't prepare yourself, the trust required to accept food and drink from others, the violation when that trust is exploited. You're still holding the jar, still trying to decide whether you'll actually use it. The magician's instructions are clear: 3 drops in wine served during a meal when the beloved is relaxed and unsuspecting. But you're thinking about the ethics, about whether magical coercion is different from emotional manipulation or strategic flirting, or any of the other semi-honest tactics people use to attract partners. Where's the line between acceptable persuasion and unacceptable violation? The ancient Egyptians apparently drew that line much further out than you'd prefer, in a place where slipping bodily fluids into someone's wine still counted as reasonable courtship behavior. The jar is getting warm in your hands from your body heat, and that somehow makes the whole thing feel more real and more ridiculous simultaneously. You're standing in ancient Egypt holding your own urine mixed with honey, contemplating drugging someone's drink in the name of love, and some part of your mind is screaming that this is absolutely insane, while another part notes that people in your own time spend hundreds on pheromone perfumes and attraction supplements. So maybe the methodology changes, but the desperation remains constant across millennia. You're watching a jeweler work at his bench, his fingers surprisingly delicate as he carves tiny hieroglyphs into a piece of carnelian no bigger than your thumbnail. The stone glows red in the lamplight, the colour of blood and passion and Set's desert, and the jeweler explains that carnelian is the ideal material for love amulets because it holds heat, absorbs body warmth, and supposedly resonates with the warmth of desire. He's carving the name of Hathor in her aspect as Golden One, each glyph precise despite the stone's small surface. This isn't casual decoration. These names are invocations, batteries that supposedly charge the stone with divine attention. The jeweler sets down his carving tool and picks up a small dish containing something amber and sticky. Beeswax, he explains, mixed with myrrh resin and something he calls the binding agent, which turns out to be a strand of your hair heated and dissolved into the wax. You hadn't expected your hair to be literally melted into the amulet's construction, but apparently that's essential. The wax mixture will seal the carved stone, protecting the inscription, while simultaneously binding your essence to the divine name. It's sympathetic magic meeting craftsmanship, turning jewellery into a wearable spell. But before he applies the wax, he instructs you to breathe on the stone 3 times, each breath carrying a whispered name, the name of your beloved. Your breath, he says, carries your voice, your life force, your intention. By breathing on the stone while speaking the name, you're coding the amulet with specific targeting information, like programming coordinates into a device. The stone will know who it's meant to affect, whose heart it's meant to draw toward yours. You feel slightly foolish whispering a name at a rock, but you do it anyway because you've come this far and you're not going to skip steps now. The jeweller heats the wax mixture over a small oil lamp until it becomes liquid enough to paint onto the stone. He works quickly, coating the carved surface with a thin amber layer that fills the hieroglyphs and seals the entire gem. As it cools, he wraps a second hair, yours again, around the stone's perimeter, pressing it into the still soft wax. Now your essence encircles the goddess's name, he says with satisfaction. You carry Hathor's power bound by your own nature. The amulet will draw love to you as naturally as flowers draw bees. These love amulets come in remarkable variety, and the jeweller's workshop displays dozens of examples like a museum of romantic desperation. There are simple ones, polished stones with single divine names. Complex ones, elaborate pendants featuring multiple gods arranged in hierarchies of attraction. Hathor at the centre, surrounded by bees for domestic happiness, Taweret for fertility, Isis for binding loyalty. Some are tiny, meant to be worn on a cord under clothing where they rest against skin, heating with body warmth and supposedly radiating their influence invisibly. Others are ostentatious, designed to be seen to announce that the wearer is under divine protection and magically enhanced. The materials matter as much as the inscriptions. Red stones, carnelian, jasper, garnet, for passion and physical desire. Green stones, malachite, turquoise, for growth and fertility, better for those seeking marriage rather than just attraction. Blue stones, lapis lazuli, for communication and understanding, ideal if the problem is less about attraction and more about being heard, being understood, bridging the gap between two personalities who keep talking past each other. The jeweler can recommend specific stones based on your situation, though you suspect the recommendations correlate suspiciously well with what he has in stock. Some amulets contain written spells rolled into tiny scrolls and inserted into hollow beads or cylindrical containers. You examine one, a gold tube no wider than a reed pen, capped at both ends, with a spell written on papyrus compressed inside. The text, barely legible at this scale, reads, "Let she who sees me find me pleasing. Let she who speaks with me desire my voice. Let she who knows my name carry it in her heart as I carry her name in this gold." It's poetry and magic fused, intimate and desperate in equal measure. The tube hangs on a delicate chain meant to rest at the throat where voice originates, amplifying the spell's connection to communication and attraction. Historians still argue about whether these amulets were primarily magical or psychological, whether people believed the stones themselves held power, or whether wearing the amulet boosted confidence, and that confidence did the actual work. The answer, as usual, is probably both, and neither. The Egyptians wouldn't have made the distinction. Magic and psychology weren't separate categories. An amulet that makes you feel more attractive makes you act more attractive, which makes others perceive you as more attractive, which proves the amulet works. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, but that doesn't make it less real in its effects. The jeweler tells you about commission work he's done for wealthier clients. One nobleman paid for a pectoral collar featuring 7 rows of stones, each row associated with a different love goddess or beneficial deity, the whole assemblage weighing enough to make a fashion statement and a spiritual declaration simultaneously. The nobleman wore it to a feast, and apparently his longtime interest, a wealthy widow who'd been resisting his advances for months, finally agreed to consider courtship. Did the amulet work, or did the widow simply appreciate the public demonstration of effort and investment? The jeweler shrugs. Either way, he got paid and the nobleman got his widow. There's a darker category of amulets. Those meant not to attract, but to protect against attraction. Parents commission these for daughters, worried about inappropriate suitors or magical manipulation. The protective amulets feature Bees in his most fierce aspect, or sometimes Sekhmet, the lion goddess who devours enemies. The idea is to create a magical boundary that repels unwanted advances, makes the wearer seem less appealing to those with harmful intentions, while remaining visible to appropriate suitors. It's selective filtering through divine intervention, though you wonder how the amulet is supposed to distinguish between approved and unapproved admirers. Probably it just makes the wearer feel safer, more confident in rejecting advances, which functionally achieves the same goal. You find references to amulet-breaking spells, magic designed to neutralize someone else's protective amulets, so your attraction magic can reach them. These spells involve identifying what type of amulet the target wears, color, material, deity invoked, then working counter magic aimed specifically at that protection, its escalation, layers upon layers of magical offense and defense, everyone trying to outmaneuver everyone else's spiritual protections. The jeweler mentions, almost casually, that he also sells amulet-breaking amulets, charms that supposedly penetrate other charms. You're not sure whether to be impressed by the business model or depressed by the implications. The completed amulet cools in your hand, the wax now hardened, your hair sealed permanently against the carnelian surface. The jeweler strings it on a cord made from linen fibres, not dyed because colour would add conflicting symbolism, and ties it with a special knot he calls the Breath of Hathor, though it looks like a fairly standard slip knot to your untrained eye. He instructs you to wear it against your skin for 40 days without removing it, not even for bathing. The longer it rests against your heart, the stronger the connection grows between your desire and the goddess's power, he says. After 40 days, the amulet will be fully bonded to you, and its influence will extend outward like ripples from a stone dropped in the Nile. Do you remember wearing a lucky charm, maybe as a child? Something you convinced yourself brought good fortune? The Egyptian love amulet works on similar principles but with far more elaborate theology backing it. You're not just wearing a pretty stone, you're wearing a compressed ritual, a portable spell, a piece of divine attention that you can carry into any situation where you need supernatural assistance, convincing someone to love you back. You're crouched in a cemetery at midnight, digging a hole with a bronze trowel while trying not to think about whose bones might be a few feet below where you're working. The magician beside you holds a small clay figure, your romantic rival rendered in miniature with exaggerated features that border on caricature. She's beautiful, this rival, or at least she is in real life. In clay form, she's grotesque, deliberately ugly, her proportions distorted to diminish her power. The magician has scratched her name across the figure's chest, binding the representation to the actual person, creating that crucial sympathetic link that makes the magic supposedly transfer from clay to flesh. This is sabotage work, the shadow side of love magic, where instead of attracting your beloved, you're actively working to remove obstacles. Specifically, human obstacles who've inconveniently attracted the same person you want. The ethics here are even murkier than usual, and you're acutely aware that you've crossed from trying to make someone like me into trying to destroy someone else's chances, which feels meaningfully different, even if both involve magical coercion. But jealousy is a powerful motivator, and the magician assured you that rival banishing is among his most requested services. You're not alone in your willingness to fight dirty when love is at stake. The instructions are specific and vindictive. You're to bury the clay figure upside down, inverting her position in the world, symbolically turning her fortune on its head. As you place her in the hole, you speak her name 3 times, each repetition carrying a curse. May her beauty fade in his eyes. May her words sound hollow to his ears. May he see her and feel only indifference where once he felt desire. The magician adds his own incantations in a language you don't recognize, probably Greek or Aramaic mixed with Egyptian. The multilingual hodgepodge that characterizes late-period magic as different traditions blend and compete. But you're not just burying her upside down, you're also piercing the figure with 13 bronze needles, one through each eye to blind your beloved to her beauty, one through the mouth to silence her persuasive words, one through the heart to deaden any love he might feel for her, and 10 more distributed across the body to create maximum magical disruption. Each needle goes in with a small speech about what you're destroying. I pierce your power over him. I pierce your hold on his thoughts. I pierce the connection between your voice and his heart. It's remarkably therapeutic in a deeply unhealthy way, channeling all your jealous rage into focused ritual action. The hole gets filled and you tamp down the earth, marking the spot with a small stone so you can find it again if needed. Some spells require you to return after a lunar cycle and dig up the figure to check whether it's deteriorated, which supposedly indicates the spell is working. The magician explains that underground, in the realm of the dead, the figure will slowly be influenced by decay and forgetting, and those qualities will transfer to your rival through the sympathetic link. She'll be forgotten, overlooked, rendered irrelevant in your beloved's mind just as the clay figure is literally being buried and dismissed. Historians still argue about how common these rival sabotage spells were versus how much they show up in the record because they're dramatic and well preserved. Clay figures survive burial better than organic materials, so we have archaeological evidence of this practice scattered across Egyptian burial grounds. But was this standard practice for anyone with romantic competition, or was it extreme behaviour that most people condemned? The magical papyri treated as routine, but legal texts occasionally mention punishments for harmful magic, suggesting society had complicated feelings about cursing your neighbours even in the name of love. You find examples of increasingly elaborate sabotage spells. One involves creating 2 figures, the rival and your beloved, then binding them together with thread while reciting spells meant to make their relationship become burdensome, irritating, full of misunderstandings and disappointments. You're not trying to destroy the rival. You're trying to make her relationship with your beloved so unpleasant that it collapses under its own weight. It's psychological warfare translated into clay and thread, and the spell includes specific suggested conflicts. May she nag him about small things. May he find her laugh grating. May they argue about money and never find resolution. Another sabotage technique involves sympathetic magic aimed at creating distance. You take Earth from 2 locations far apart, one from near your home, one from the farthest place you can reasonably reach. Then you mix that Earth with water and use it to form a figure of your rival. As the figure dries and the Earth from distant places becomes one, your spell is supposedly causing your rival to feel restless, pulled toward distant places, suddenly dissatisfied with her current life and location. If she moves away or loses interest in staying near your beloved, even better. You've removed her from the game board without directly cursing her. The magician mentions a client who took sabotage to extremes. She commissioned 7 different figures of 7 different rivals, all women her beloved had shown interest in over the years, and had them buried at 7 different locations, forming a circle around the city. She was essentially siege magic, cutting off all her beloved's other romantic options and funneling his attention toward her by process of elimination. The magician laughs while telling this story, clearly impressed by the ambition if not the ethics. He doesn't mention whether it worked, but you get the sense he's telling you this to upsell you on additional figures for additional rivals just in case. There's a category of sabotage that targets not the rival but the relationship itself. You create 2 figures bound together, then slowly work to separate them, cutting 1 thread per day over 9 days, each cutting accompanied by spells of dissolution and discord. By the 9th day, the figures are completely separated, and theoretically so is the relationship you're targeting. This appeals to people who don't want to directly harm anyone but just want the inconvenient couple to naturally, organically decide they're not right for each other. It's the conscious uncoupling of ancient Egyptian curse work. But sabotage magic comes with warnings that the other forms of love magic don't emphasize as strongly. The magician tells you that rival cursing has a tendency to backfire if your target has stronger protective magic than you anticipated. If your rival wears better amulets, consults more powerful priests, or simply has divine favour you're unaware of, your curse can bounce back and affect you instead. Suddenly you're the one whose beauty fades, whose words sound hollow, who can't seem to maintain anyone's interest. The magical recoil from failed sabotage is supposedly worse than never attempting it at all. Do you remember that sick feeling when you discovered someone you liked was interested in someone else? That cocktail of jealousy and inadequacy and rage at the unfairness of attraction? The Egyptians felt that too, obviously, and they channeled it into clay figures and midnight cemetery visits rather than social media stalking or passive-aggressive commentary. The technology changes, but the emotional mechanics remain identical. Everyone trying to manipulate circumstances to their advantage, everyone convinced their suffering justifies bending the rules, everyone simultaneously perpetrator and victim in the endless warfare of competing desires. You walk away from the cemetery with dirt under your fingernails and a queasy feeling in your stomach that might be guilt or might be premature satisfaction. The clay figure is buried, the needles are in place, and now you wait to see if your rival's influence over your beloved begins to mysteriously wane. Part of you hopes it works. Part of you hopes it doesn't, because if it does work, you'll have to live with the knowledge that you sabotaged another person's happiness to serve your own desires. Magic makes revenge easy, but it doesn't resolve the moral weight of what revenge costs. You're sitting cross-legged on a reed mat in a dim room where the air smells of incense and nervous anticipation, watching a musician tune her harp with the focused intensity of someone who believes the next hour might literally rearrange another person's soul. She's not a temple musician, those dignified women who play for gods, but rather a specialist in what she calls harmonic enchantment, which sounds more respectable than using music to make someone fall in love with you. Her harp is beautiful, made from sycamore wood and inlaid with patterns of lotus flowers, and she explains that the instrument itself has been consecrated to Hathor through a ritual involving honey and rose oil rubbed into the wood grain until it absorbed the scent. The theory behind musical love magic is both poetic and oddly mechanical. Sound, the musician explains, is vibration made audible, and vibration moves through matter, air, water, flesh, bone, carrying its patterns wherever it travels. Certain combinations of notes create harmonies that resonate with the human heart, literally causing the organ to beat in rhythm with the music. If you can control someone's heartbeat through sound, you can supposedly influence the emotions that heart generates. Love, desire, attraction, these are all vibrations at their core, just patterns of energy moving through bodies, and music is humanity's oldest technology for manipulating those patterns intentionally. She begins to play, and immediately you understand why people pay for this service. The melody is haunting, not quite sad but deeply longing, each note hanging in the air just long enough to make you ache for the next one. The rhythm is slightly slower than your resting heartbeat, which supposedly calms anxiety while simultaneously creating a sense of anticipation. She's not playing at you, she's playing into you, finding frequencies that resonate in your chest and belly. After just a few minutes you feel oddly vulnerable, opened up, like the music has found cracks in your emotional armor and is gently prying them wider. "This is the melody of longing," she says without stopping her playing, her voice somehow carrying over the music without competing with it. "I will play this for your beloved, and the notes will lodge in their mind like seeds in soil." Days later they'll hear echoes of this melody in random sounds, water pouring, wind in trees, their own heartbeat in quiet moments, and each echo will bring thoughts of you. The music creates an association between beauty, longing, and your presence. By the third or fourth remembering, they won't even realize the connection is artificial. Historians still argue about whether ancient Egyptian musicians actually believed in the magical properties of specific melodies, or whether this was sophisticated psychology dressed in mystical language. Modern music therapy suggests certain frequencies and rhythms genuinely affect brain chemistry, mood, even hormone production. The Egyptians might have been observing real phenomena, music's power to alter consciousness and emotion, and explaining it through their available conceptual framework of magic and divine influence. The mechanism they proposed was wrong, but the effect they identified was real. The musician keeps an inventory of melodies for different purposes, the melody of longing for creating desire in someone currently indifferent, the harmony of reunion for rekindling dead relationships, its rhythm supposedly matching the heartbeat of lovers in embrace, reminding the listener's body of intimacy it's forgotten. The discord of forgetting for ending unwanted attachments. This one uses deliberately jarring intervals that create discomfort, associating thoughts of a specific person with musical ugliness. And most powerfully, the Song of Binding, which she only performs for clients who pay triple her normal fee because it requires 3 consecutive nights of playing and leaves her exhausted, her fingers bleeding from the strings. She demonstrates a fragment of the Song of Binding, just enough to give you a taste without activating its full effect. The melody is complex, layering multiple rhythms that shouldn't work together but somehow do, creating a musical knot that your brain struggles to untangle. You can feel it trying to loop back on itself, to become an earworm that will repeat endlessly in your mental background. Imagine this playing for 3 hours each night, she says. By the 3rd night, your beloved cannot get it out of their head, and I will have woven your name into the rhythm, not sung it, but encoded it in a pattern of notes. Their unconscious mind will associate the inescapable melody with you, creating an obsession they cannot explain or resist. But musical enchantment isn't just about the harp. You encounter flute players who claim their instruments access different aspects of consciousness. Higher, airier notes that affect thoughts and dreams rather than emotions and heartbeat. One flute specialist demonstrates his whisper of yearning, a breathy melody that sounds like wind through reeds or distant voices, designed to be played outside your beloved's window at dawn when they're hovering between sleep and waking. The music infiltrates dreams, becomes part of the dream landscape, and supposedly when they wake they'll carry a vague sense of longing without knowing why. There are drummers who work with rhythm alone, no melody at all, just patterns of percussion meant to sync with and then manipulate heartbeat and breathing. One drum magician explains that desire has its own rhythm, faster than resting heartbeat but not as fast as fear, a tempo that signals excitement without triggering anxiety. If you can get someone's heart beating at desire's rhythm while they're in your presence, their body will generate the emotions that match that physiological state. It's Pavlovian conditioning through percussion, training their autonomic nervous system to associate you with arousal. The most elaborate musical magic involves ensembles, multiple musicians playing complementary enchantments simultaneously, creating a sonic environment so saturated with attraction magic that the target supposedly cannot resist. One wealthy merchant hired a 5-person ensemble to play outside his beloved's home every evening for a month, the musicians rotating through different melodies but all aimed at the same goal. The woman he was pursuing either fell genuinely in love with him or simply agreed to courtship to make the nightly concerts stop. The record isn't clear which, and possibly she wasn't clear herself by the end. There are cautionary tales too. A musician hired to play the Discord of Forgetting, meant to help a client get over an ex-lover, accidentally played it in the wrong key and supposedly made the client even more obsessed, the jarring notes creating an uncomfortable fixation instead of repulsion. Another story describes a flute player whose whisper of yearning was so effective that it attracted not just the intended target, but everyone within hearing distance, creating a chaotic situation where half the neighborhood developed sudden, inexplicable attraction to the client. The musician had to spend days playing a counter-melody to disperse the excess enchantment. Do you remember a song that became inextricably linked with a person, where hearing it even years later brings their face to mind with startling clarity. That's the mechanism these Egyptian musicians were deliberately exploiting. Music's unique ability to encode memory and emotion, to bypass rational thought and speak directly to the limbic system where feelings live. They were hacking the brain's association algorithms, using sound as the payload to deliver attraction and obsession. The harp player finishes demonstrating her repertoire and rests her hands on the strings to still them. Music is honest magic, she says. It requires no deception, no hidden ingredients, no pretending. Your beloved will hear the melody and feel what they feel. I cannot force emotions they're incapable of experiencing. I can only amplify what's already present in seed form, make audible the harmonies that already exist between you as potential. If there's nothing there, no resonance at all, even the song of binding will fail. Music reveals what's possible. It cannot create something from nothing. You're not sure whether that limitation makes musical magic more ethical or just more honest about its limitations. Either way, you're already humming the melody of longing under your breath, feeling it take root in your mind exactly as the musician promised it would. In 3 days, you'll pay her to play it for your beloved, and then you'll wait to see if musical frequencies can accomplish what honey, hair, wax and stone have not yet managed. Turning indifference into interest, absence into longing, two separate hearts into something that beats briefly at the same tempo. You're standing in a temple courtyard at dawn, watching a priest sharpen a bronze knife while the white dove coos anxiously in a wicker cage nearby. The bird has no idea what's coming, which is probably merciful, though you're not feeling particularly merciful as you consider the economics of what you're about to witness. The dove cost you a week's wages, the priest's services another week, and the specific timing, dawn on the day of the new moon in the month sacred to Hathor, required waiting 17 days, during which your beloved has been spending increasing amounts of time with someone who isn't you. Desperation has made you willing to trade blood for results, though technically it's the dove's blood, not yours, which feels like a moral loophole, even as you recognize it's probably not. The priest explains the logic while he works, his tone suggesting he's given this speech many times to many anxious petitioners. Animals contain life force, that vital energy the Egyptians call ka, and when an animal is sacrificed properly, with the right prayers at the right time to the right deity, that life force transfers to your petition, charging it with power it wouldn't otherwise possess. A dove is particularly appropriate for love magic because doves are sacred to Hathor, representing joy, sexuality, and domestic harmony. By offering the dove's life, you're giving Hathor something valuable in exchange for her intervention in your romantic disaster. But not just any sacrifice works for any purpose. The priest maintains a detailed catalogue of which animals benefit which types of magic. Doves for attraction and new love, as you've learned. Gazelles for fertility and marriage. More expensive than doves because gazelles are wild and difficult to catch, but supposedly more potent if your goal is long-term partnership rather than just initial attraction. Geese for renewing dead passions in established relationships, because geese mate for life and their loyalty is legendary. Fish for flexibility and love, for situations where you want someone to adapt to you, become more accommodating, bend to your desires. The priest picks up the dove, its white feathers bright against his dark hands, and holds it toward the east where Ra is just beginning his daily journey across the sky. He speaks in the formal temple language, words you recognize as prayers but can't fully translate. The dove struggles briefly, then seems to calm as if it understands or has simply given up. The knife moves quickly, the priest is practiced at this, and the death is as clean as Bronze Age technology allows. Blood streams into a copper bowl positioned precisely to catch every drop, because wasting sacrificial blood is both disrespectful to the goddess and magically inefficient. The blood gets mixed with wine and honey, those ubiquitous ingredients again, plus myrrh resin and something the priest calls tears of Hathor, which turns out to be lotus oil. He's creating a liquid offering, something that can be poured out at the goddess's altar while speaking your petition aloud. You're required to state exactly what you want. No vague "make them love me," but specific, concrete requests. Let Neferet see me with favour. Let her smile when I approach. Let her consider my offer of courtship seriously. Let her heart incline toward mine as the lotus inclines toward the sun. Historians still argue about how common animal sacrifice was in personal love magic versus temple ritual. The archaeological evidence shows animal bones at temple sites, but determining which ones were sacrificial offerings versus dinner is notoriously difficult. The papyri mentions sacrifice frequently enough that it must have been a real practice, but whether ordinary people could afford it regularly, or whether it was reserved for desperate situations and wealthy patrons is unclear. You're certainly feeling desperate enough to justify the expense, though part of you wonders if Hathor actually cares about doves, or if this is just expensive theatre designed to make you feel like you've done everything possible. The priest takes the blood wine mixture and pours it slowly over a stone altar carved with Hathor's image, the goddess depicted with cow horns cradling a solar disk, her face serene and knowing. The liquid soaks into the stone, which is already stained dark from countless previous offerings, and the priest chants your petition 7 times, each repetition supposedly carrying it deeper into the divine realm where Hathor might notice and respond. You're standing with your hands raised in the traditional posture of prayer, feeling simultaneously reverent and ridiculous, aware that you're participating in a transaction as old as civilization itself. Humans offering sacrifice in hopes that gods will manipulate reality on their behalf. But sacrifice isn't always lethal. Some love offerings involve releasing animals rather than killing them. You watch a woman bring a basket of doves to a different part of the temple, and instead of slaughter, a priestess blesses them and sets them free. The doves circle once, twice, then fly toward the river, and the priestess assures the woman that the freed birds carry her prayers to Hathor on their wings. This seems gentler, more optimistic, and you wonder about the theology that determines when life should be taken versus released. The priestess explains that killing is for urgent situations requiring powerful intervention, while releasing is for situations where patience is possible, and you're asking for gradual, gentle influence, rather than dramatic transformation. There are gruesome variations in the texts. One spell requires not just killing a dove, but specifically strangling it, while speaking your beloved's name, the logic being that the compression of the bird's throat mirrors the compression of choice around your target's heart. They'll feel compelled, strangled into compliance. Another calls for cutting a dove's heart from its body while still warm and burying it at your beloved's doorstep, the theory being that their own heart will begin to respond in sympathy with the buried organ. These spells make you queasy, less because of the animal cruelty. The Egyptians slaughtered animals for food constantly without moral qualms, and more because they reveal how far people will go when obsession overrides ethics. The priest disposes of the dove's body according to ritual requirements, burning specific parts as offerings and burying others near the river where the sacred and mundane worlds meet. Nothing is wasted. Even the feathers get collected for use in other rituals. He hands you a small packet wrapped in linen, ashes from the burnt offering mixed with salt from the Red Sea, and instructs you to sprinkle it around your home's threshold. The idea is that your beloved, upon crossing that threshold, will step through the consecrated ashes and become subject to the sacrifice's influence. It's sympathetic magic again. They physically contact the remnants of the offering, linking them to the petition the offering powered. You encounter references to royal sacrifice magic, which is simultaneously more elaborate and more troubling. Pharaohs commissioning mass sacrifices for political marriages, dozens of animals killed to ensure alliances sealed through strategic weddings would hold. The texts describe these grand ceremonies matter-of-factly, as if sacrificing 40 doves and 10 gazelles to make a Hittite princess agreeable to marrying an Egyptian king is simply prudent statecraft. The scale transforms the ritual from personal magic into political technology, religion as diplomatic tool. Do you remember the first time you witnessed death? How it seemed both more and less significant than you'd imagined. The dove died quickly professionally, and now its blood has been incorporated into a spell that may or may not influence another human being's feelings. The transaction is complete. Life for love, blood for desire, death offered in hopes of generating connection. Whether Hathor notices, whether the sacrifice works, whether your beloved suddenly finds you more appealing, these outcomes remain uncertain. But you've done something, acted decisively, paid a price that felt proportional to your desperation. The priest washes his hands in a basin of water blessed by temple recitation, the water turning faintly pink as blood dissolves and disperses. The goddess has received your offering, he says, with the confidence of someone who cannot be proven wrong. Whether she grants your petition depends on many factors: the sincerity of your heart, the compatibility of your souls, whether your desire serves or disrupts the cosmic order she maintains. We offer, the gods dispose. Return in one lunar cycle, and if your petition remains ungranted, we can offer again. Though I'll note that repeated sacrifice without results might indicate divine disapproval rather than divine inattention. It's a neat theological catch-all. If it works, the sacrifice was effective. If it doesn't work, the gods are sending a message through their silence. You cannot lose when you've structured the belief system to accommodate both success and failure as meaningful outcomes. You leave the temple with ash salt in your packet and blood wine on your conscience, wondering whether you've just participated in ancient wisdom or expensive superstition, and realizing the answer might not matter if you end up believing the magic worked, whether it actually did or not. You're examining a collection of love spells recovered from a royal tomb, and the handwriting alone tells you these aren't common folk desperate for affection. These are carefully inscribed texts commissioned by someone with resources, power, and apparently just as much romantic insecurity as everyone else. The papyrus is high quality, the hieratic script executed by a professional scribe, and the spells themselves are remarkably specific about targeting noble women and ensuring political alliances through magical compulsion. Even pharaohs, it seems, couldn't rely on their divine status and unlimited wealth to guarantee cooperation from potential spouses. So they hedged their bets with the same hair and honey tactics everyone else employed. One spell from the tomb of Tutankhamun, or rather from the materials buried with him, appears designed to maintain his young wife Ankhesenamun's affection, despite his physical difficulties and political pressures. The text calls for mixing lotus essence with wine and reciting prayers to Hathor 7 times before sharing the drink with his wife during private evening meals. The subtext is poignant. Even the living god of Egypt worried that his wife might not genuinely love him, might be performing duty rather than feeling desire, and he wanted magic to close that gap between obligation and authentic emotion. The New Kingdom provides particularly rich evidence of royal love magic because nobles began including personal magical texts in their tombs alongside the traditional funerary literature. You find spells commissioned by a vizier trying to attract the attention of a princess, which required extremely delicate magic. He couldn't afford to offend the royal family if discovered, but he also desperately wanted elevation through advantageous marriage. His spell is masterfully political. It asks Hathor to let her see my virtue and overlook my humble birth. Let her family recognize my worthiness. Let her father the king dream of me as a loyal son. It's love magic filtered through bureaucratic ambition. Historians still argue about how openly pharaohs and nobility practiced love magic versus how much they concealed it as potential scandal. Some texts suggest royal magicians, official court positions, included love spell preparation among their duties, making it sanctioned rather than secretive. Other evidence implies that nobles hired private practitioners and kept their magical activities quiet, knowing that admitting to magical manipulation could undermine political marriages if rivals discovered and weaponized the information. Either way, the archaeological record makes clear that royal blood didn't exempt anyone from romantic anxiety or the desire to magically tip scales in their favour. Queen Hatshepsut's reign provides fascinating ambiguity around love magic and political power. Several texts from her era mention binding the hearts of the court, and scholars debate whether this refers to political loyalty, magic, or actual romantic compulsion aimed at maintaining the support of key nobles and generals. One fragmentary spell seems designed to make her co-regent Thutmose III remain infatuated with her despite obvious political tensions between them. If authentic, it suggests Hatshepsut understood that power required both military strength and emotional manipulation, that keeping powerful men magically attracted to her was strategic statecraft. Ramesses II, who had over 100 wives and children throughout his very long reign, apparently commissioned love magic focused not on attraction. He clearly had no trouble there, but on maintaining harmony among his numerous wives and preventing jealous conflicts that could destabilize his household. One text describes a spell meant to sweeten the hearts of many toward shared purpose. Let them see sister wives rather than rivals. Let competition transform to cooperation under Hathor's gentle governance. It's love magic as conflict resolution, magical human resources management for an impossibly complex domestic situation. You find evidence of magical marriages arranged entirely through spells before the couple even met. A prince in the 18th dynasty commissioned elaborate magic targeting a Mitanni princess he'd never seen, working spells for months before she arrived in Egypt for their political marriage. The magic aimed to ensure compatibility, mutual attraction despite language barriers, and her quick adjustment to Egyptian customs. When she finally arrived and the marriage proceeded smoothly, was it because the magic worked? Because both parties were professionals doing their diplomatic duty, or because the months of magical work had convinced the prince that success was inevitable, making him more welcoming and patient than he might otherwise have been? Royal love magic often included components about fertility and producing heirs. Because romantic attraction was ultimately instrumental, it served dynastic continuity. You encounter spells that bundle together, let her love me, let her conceive easily, let the child be male, let him be healthy and favour his father. It's romance as reproductive technology, desire as a means to an end rather than an end in itself. The magic reflects a worldview where personal feelings matter, primarily for their political and dynastic consequences, where love is too important to be left to chance or genuine emotion. There are darker royal spells too, magic aimed at removing inconvenient romantic entanglements. A prince who needed to marry for political reasons but was emotionally attached to an inappropriate woman commissioned spells of severance and forgetting, essentially trying to magically erase his own feelings so duty could proceed without emotional conflict. Another text describes magic worked by a queen against her husband's concubines. Not curse work exactly, but spells meant to make the pharaoh find them increasingly tedious, their company boring, their bodies less appealing over time. It's strategic erosion of affection, calculated emotional sabotage disguised as the natural cooling of passion. The most elaborate royal love magic you encounter comes from the Ptolemaic period, when Greek and Egyptian traditions were thoroughly blended. Cleopatra, yes, that Cleopatra, appears in texts describing her use of elaborate perfumes mixed with magical ingredients, cosmetics prepared according to spells designed to make her irresistible to Roman generals. Whether these texts are historical records or later propaganda is debatable, but they reflect a tradition of understanding that even overwhelming political power benefited from supernatural enhancement. Caesar and Mark Antony might have been attracted to her intelligence and political acumen, but according to Egyptian tradition, she probably gave Hathor some credit too. Do you remember learning that powerful people throughout history often believed in magic, astrology, fortune-telling, that power doesn't necessarily correlate with skepticism? The Egyptian royalty makes this abundantly clear. These were sophisticated political operators, administrators of complex civilizations, military strategists and economic managers, and they still commissioned spells to make their wives love them and their rivals forget them. Power might grant many advantages, but it doesn't exempt anyone from the fundamental vulnerability of wanting someone who might not want you back. You find a text that's either deeply cynical or remarkably self-aware, a letter from one pharaoh to another discussing magical marriage preparation. The writer essentially says that whether the magic actually works or not, going through the rituals gives everyone involved a narrative to believe in. The couple can tell themselves their attraction is divinely ordained. The families can feel that divine powers bless the union. And even if it's all psychological theatre, the effects are real enough. It's magical realism from someone who both believes and doesn't believe simultaneously, who performs the rituals while understanding their performances, and who recognizes that sometimes the performance is the point. The royal spells end up preserved in tombs, because even in death, these pharaohs and nobles wanted their love magic close, perhaps hoping to continue their romantic manipulations in the afterlife, or perhaps simply because the spells represented such significant emotional investment during life, that they became part of the essential self that needed to transfer into eternity. Your love magic, your desperate attempts to control the uncontrollable chaos of attraction, becomes part of your eternal identity, which is either tragic or honest depending on how cynical you're feeling about human nature. You're tracing the path of Egyptian love magic forward through time, watching it mutate and spread as Alexander the Great's conquest in 332 BCE tears open the borders and lets ideas flow in multiple directions. Greek soldiers and merchants bring their own magical traditions, binding spells inscribed on lead tablets, Orphic hymns, invocations of Eros and Aphrodite, and these collide with Egyptian practices in a messy, productive fusion that produces something new and strange. The temple at Alexandria becomes a crucible where traditions merge, and the love spells that emerge are multilingual, theologically confused, and apparently more powerful for their hybrid vigour. You examine a papyrus from Greco-Roman Egypt, probably 2nd century CE, and the text is a beautiful mess of cultural collision. It invokes Hathor and Aphrodite as if they're the same goddess, which functionally they've become through Interpretatio Graeca, that Greek habit of mapping foreign deities onto their own pantheon. But the spell also calls on Isis, who by this period has absorbed characteristics of both Hathor and Aphrodite and added her own considerable power as the ultimate magical goddess. And then, just for good measure, it throws in Jewish and Christian divine names that have leaked into the magical vocabulary because power is power, and practitioners will borrow from any tradition that seems effective. The recipe is familiar in structure, but cosmopolitan in detail. Honey from Mount Hymettus near Athens, myrrh from Arabia, rose oil from Persia, papyrus from Egypt, and instructions that reference both Egyptian lunar timing and Greek astrological houses. It's love magic as international trade route, synthesizing ingredients and ideas from across the known world into a single desperate attempt to make someone named Marcus fall in love with someone named Artemisia. The spell includes phrases in Greek, Demotic Egyptian, and what might be badly mangled Hebrew, as if using multiple languages increases the odds that at least one divine being will understand and respond. The Greek contribution to Egyptian love magic is particularly notable in the emphasis on written binding spells. Defixions, curse tablets, inscribed pieces of lead that get rolled up and buried or thrown into wells. The Egyptians used written spells, obviously, but Greeks brought an almost legalistic approach, creating magical contracts that read like lawsuits filed in supernatural court. I bind Sophia, daughter of Alexandria, her mind, her will, her desire, that she may feel nothing for any man except Marcus son of Gaius, by the power of the restless dead, by Hecate of the crossroads, by Isis, greatest of magicians. It goes on for 20 lines, systematically binding every aspect of the target's romantic autonomy. This fusion magic spreads outward from Egypt along Mediterranean trade routes. Roman soldiers stationed in Egypt learn these hybrid techniques and carry them home, where Egyptian deities start appearing in Italian love spells. Isis temples spring up across the empire, and part of their appeal is precisely this reputation for powerful love magic. Women especially flock to Isis worship because she's marketed as the goddess who understands feminine desire, marital difficulties, and the need for magic that works on men who won't listen to reason. The religious spread is partly theological, but substantially pragmatic. People want access to magic that has a reputation for effectiveness. Historians still argue about whether this represents cultural appropriation, synthesis, or simply magic as a technology that travels wherever people find it useful. The Egyptians don't seem to have objected to foreigners adopting their magical practices. If anything, they profited from it through tourism to oracle sites and sales of magical materials. Greek and Roman practitioners, meanwhile, treat Egyptian magic as exotic and therefore powerful. The ancient mystical wisdom of a civilization that seems impossibly old even to them. Everyone's borrowing from everyone else in a cosmopolitan stew of supernatural problem-solving. You find a spell from Roman Britain, yes, Britain, as far from Egypt as you can get while staying in the empire, that invokes Isis and Hathor alongside Celtic and Roman deities, asking for help with a love problem in a cold northern province that the Egyptian goddesses probably never imagined. The spell uses Egyptian techniques, not magic, honey and hair, burial at a crossroads. But it's adapted to local materials, British beeswax instead of Egyptian, local river water instead of Nile water, showing how the core technology transfers even when specific ingredients can't. Magic proves remarkably adaptable when need is universal. The Greco-Roman period also produces the most elaborate magical manuals, comprehensive grimoires that compile hundreds of spells and techniques. The Greek magical papyri, discovered in Egypt but written in Greek, contain extensive sections on love magic that blend Egyptian, Greek, Jewish, and Christian elements into procedures so complex they require days of preparation and materials from across the known world. One love spell in these texts requires a strip of linen from a temple, a bronze needle never used before, ink made from myrrh dissolved in wine, specific phrases written in Greek and Egyptian letters, probably demotic, and timing coordinated with both lunar phases and astrological positions. It's love magic as elaborate ritual magic, accessibility sacrifice for supposed potency. But alongside this increasingly complex high magic, simpler folk practices continue and spread. Roman women wear amulets with Isis's name even if they don't fully understand the theology. Greek merchants carry hair knot charms learned from Egyptian lovers. Jewish communities in Alexandria develop their own fusion magic that carefully avoids Egyptian deities but keeps the practical techniques. The hair, the honey, the knots, the timing, these core technologies prove durable across cultural boundaries because they're simple enough to remember, transmit, and adapt. You trace one particular spell's journey from Egypt to Rome to Gaul to medieval Europe, watching it transform at each step. The Egyptian original invoked Hathor and required lotus flowers. The Roman version substituted Venus and roses. The Gallic version added Celtic goddess names and local flowers. By the medieval period, it had become a Christian charm that invoked Mary and used church-blessed roses, but the structure, gathering flowers at dawn, mixing them with honey, speaking a beloved's name 7 times, remained recognizable across 1,000 years and as many miles. The technology persists while the theological justification evolves to match local beliefs. The fusion also works backward, influencing Egyptian practice. Late-period Egyptian love spells start incorporating Greek astrological timing that earlier spells don't mention. Demotic magical texts include Greek god names alongside traditional Egyptian deities. The boundary between authentic Egyptian magic and foreign influences becomes impossible to locate, which suggests the boundary was always permeable, that magical practice never belonged exclusively to one culture, but flowed wherever human need created demand. Do you remember learning that cultural exchange is never simple? That ideas transform as they travel? That origin stories matter less than practical results? Egyptian love magic spreading across the Mediterranean proves this perfectly. The rituals change, but the desperation remains constant. Someone in Britain tying knots to bind a lover's will is participating in the same human tradition as someone in Memphis 3,000 years earlier, even if they'd never recognize each other's specific practices. The emotions are universal. The magical technology just adapts to local conditions and beliefs. You end this section looking at a map showing Isis temples across the Roman Empire. Dozens of sites from Egypt to Spain to the edges of Germany, each one a node in a network of magical knowledge transmission. These weren't just religious centres, they were essentially franchises of Egyptian magical practice, places where people could access techniques and deities that had proven effective enough to travel thousands of miles from their origin. Love magic as cultural export, desire as the motivation for religious syncretism, the human need to control uncontrollable feelings, creating bridges between civilizations that politics and war kept trying to burn. You're standing in your own time now, watching a woman tie knots in a red thread while muttering under her breath, and you realize with the start that she's performing a spell that would be recognizable to an Egyptian magician from 3,000 years ago. The specific deity names have changed. She's calling on saints or abstract forces, or maybe just her own desperate hope, but the technology is identical. Knots to bind, red for passion, words to focus intention. The whole ritual performed in secret because love magic still occupies that uncomfortable space between acceptable and shameful. The Nile is thousands of miles and millennia away, but its magical traditions flow through her hands like water finding familiar channels. Walk into any shop that sells candles and crystals and you'll find Egyptian love magic wearing modern clothes. Rose quartz for attraction, that's just carnelian amulets updated for New Age sensibilities. Honey jars where you write someone's name on paper, add sweeteners and herbs, then seal the jar while speaking your intention. That's the exact structure of Egyptian honey spells, minus the explicit religious invocations. Even the instruction to bury the jar or hide it where the target will pass nearby echoes Egyptian practices of burying spells at thresholds and crossroads. The packaging is contemporary, but the mechanism is ancient, proven by its persistence across empires and religions that tried repeatedly to suppress this kind of folk magic. You find Egyptian influences in traditions that would never acknowledge the debt. Hoodoo love spells from the American South use red flannel bags filled with herbs and personal items. That's the same sympathetic logic as Egyptian hair and wax charms, transmitted through African diaspora traditions that themselves absorbed Egyptian practices centuries ago when trade routes connected sub-Saharan Africa with Nile Valley civilizations. The specific plants change, high John root instead of lotus, but the principle of carrying concentrated intention in a portable charm remains constant. Cultural anthropologists can trace these lineages, showing how a spell might travel from Egypt to North Africa, to West Africa, to the Caribbean, to Louisiana, transforming at each stop but maintaining its essential DNA. The Catholic folk magic of Latin America contains unmistakable Egyptian echoes too. Saint Martha is invoked for love and domestic harmony the way Hathor once was, and the offerings left at her shrines, honey, flowers, sweet wine, would be familiar to any Egyptian temple worker. The saint herself becomes a kind of cultural translation layer, allowing people to practice ancient magic while remaining within Christian orthodoxy, at least nominally. Historians still argue whether these parallels represent actual transmission through Mediterranean trade and colonization, or whether they're independent inventions arising from universal human needs and limited magical technologies. Probably both, as usual. Modern love spells sold online or in occult shops often cite ancient Egyptian origins, sometimes legitimately, more often aspirationally. A seller on Etsy offers authentic Hathor love oil, recipe from ancient Egyptian temple papyri, and you're skeptical but also impressed by the marketing. Whether the recipe is actually ancient or cobbled together from grimoires and imagination doesn't entirely matter. What matters is that Egyptian magic still carries cultural authority, the weight of antiquity and exotic wisdom that makes people trust it might work. The Nile Valley's reputation for powerful magic established over thousands of years continues to sell products in the age of Amazon Prime. But some continuities are more direct and scholarly. Modern ceremonial magic, particularly in the Western esoteric tradition, deliberately draws on Egyptian sources filtered through the Greek magical papyri. Organizations like the Golden Dawn Incorporated reconstructed Egyptian rituals into their systems, and through them, elements of authentic Egyptian love magic entered contemporary occult practice. A modern magician performing a complex ritual to invoke Hathor for romantic assistance might be using techniques that genuinely descend from Egyptian temple practice, even if they're performing them in a London flat rather than a Nile-side sanctuary. The chain of transmission is documented, traceable, real. Psychology and therapy have their own version of this continuity. When a therapist helps someone visualize their ideal relationship, hold objects that symbolize partnership, create rituals around dating or courtship, that's essentially secularized sympathetic magic. The mechanism is reframed. Instead of cosmic forces, we talk about neuroplasticity, visualization, and self-fulfilling prophecies. But the practice remains structurally identical to Egyptian love magic. You're using physical objects and repeated actions to focus intention and reprogram your approach to romance. The spells became cognitive behavioral therapy, but they're still spells in their fundamental operation. You notice that even people who scoff at magic often perform their own versions unconsciously. The person who wears a specific outfit on dates because they once had success in it, that's amulet logic. The individual who follows elaborate morning routines before big romantic encounters, creating stability through ritual, that's sympathetic magic disguised as self-care. Someone who keeps a photo of their beloved and touches it while thinking loving thoughts. That's the same principle as the Egyptian figure magic, using a representation to affect the actual person. We've rationalized the practice, stripped away the explicit supernatural claims, but we haven't stopped doing it because it serves psychological needs that predate civilization. Historians still argue about what we should call this continuity. Is it cultural transmission, making Egyptian love magic a tradition that literally travelled forward through history? Or is it parallel invention, the same solutions emerging repeatedly because humans face the same problems with the same limited tools? The answer matters less than the recognition that what those Egyptian magicians were doing, trying to manage the chaos of desire, seeking control over experiences that feel uncontrollable, creating rituals that provide comfort even when outcomes remain uncertain, is exactly what people still do. Whether they call it magic, manifestation, therapy, or just hope. Do you remember the first time you tried to make someone like you, the mental bargains you made, the small superstitions you developed? That impulse, that desperate creativity in the face of romantic uncertainty connects you directly to every Egyptian who ever mixed honey with hair, tied knots at midnight, or whispered prayers to Hathor. The Nile has changed its course. The temples are ruins, the gods are mostly forgotten, but the human heart remains as chaotic and ungovernable as ever, and people still reach for any tool that promises even the illusion of control. The spells persist not because they work in any objectively verifiable way, but because they provide structure to formless longing, transform passive suffering into active ritual, and give us something to do besides wait helplessly for other people to choose us. They're technologies of hope as much as technologies of magic, and hope has always been humanity's most durable survival mechanism. Whether you call it prayer or spell or positive thinking or putting yourself out there, you're participating in a tradition that stretches back to the very beginning of recorded human culture. to those first written spells on papyrus reeds beside the flooding Nile. And here, now, tonight as you drift towards sleep with these stories of ancient desperate love floating through your consciousness, you're the latest in a chain of humans who've contemplated these questions. How do we make ourselves lovable? Can will overcome circumstance? Is there magic in the world or just coincidence and self-deception? The Egyptians asked these questions 3,000 years ago and found answers that satisfied them, even if those answers wouldn't survive modern scrutiny. Their rituals gave meaning to suffering and agency to the powerless, which might be magic enough. The night is deep now, and your breathing has slowed without you noticing. The stories are winding down, spiraling inward like the Nile returning to its banks after flood season. Somewhere across time and space, an Egyptian is also falling asleep, having just completed a love spell or having decided that maybe some things are better left to fate. You're connected to that person by the universal experience of wanting and hoping and trying, of being human in a world that doesn't always care about human desires. The magic they worked might not have bent reality, but it bent their experience of reality, gave them comfort and purpose and the sense of having tried. And sometimes trying, the ritual of trying, is its own form of success. Let the ancient lovers rest in their tombs with their spells and amulets. Let the Nile flow as it has flowed for millions of years, indifferent and eternal. Let Hathor smile in whatever realm goddesses inhabit, amused by the endless human drama playing out in her name. And let yourself rest, too, your own dramas temporarily suspended, your own heart's chaos quieted for this moment. The love spells and hair charms have done their work, not magical work, but the work of story, carrying you away from your present concerns into a time when people believed different things but felt the same feelings, wanted the same impossible wants, and tried with touching creativity to impose order on the beautiful, terrifying randomness of love. Close your eyes now. The Nile's water laps against reed boats in the darkness. Somewhere, honey is being mixed with whispered names. Somewhere, knots are being tied with trembling fingers. Somewhere, someone is hoping, and that hope, that eternal human hope, flows forward through time like a river that never runs dry, connecting every lonely heart that's ever searched for magic in a world that offers mostly mystery. Sleep now. The story is done, but the river flows on, as it always has, as it always will, carrying its secrets towards some distant sea where all waters merge and all magic becomes one. The voices from the past grow softer now, fading like incense smoke dissipating in temple corridors long empty of worshippers. You've travelled so far tonight, walked beside magicians and lovers and desperate souls who believed honey and hair could change destiny. Their world is gone, crumbled into museum displays and papyrus fragments, but their longing echoes forward, recognizable, human, strangely comforting in its universality. We're all of us reaching across impossible distances toward other hearts, hoping to be chosen, hoping to matter, hoping that somewhere in the chaos there's a pattern we can influence, even slightly, even through rituals that might be nothing more than a beautiful, necessary pretending. Let the Egyptian lovers rest. Their spells are complete, their outcomes already determined by history. Whatever happened, whether the honey worked, whether the knots held, whether the songs lodged in the intended hearts, has already been resolved for 3,000 years. There's peace in that finality, comfort in knowing that all romantic dramas eventually conclude one way or another, and life continues past whatever crisis feels eternal in the moment. Your own story is still being written, still uncertain, still full of possibility. The magic you need isn't in ancient recipes, but in your willingness to remain open, to risk hoping, to try again after disappointment. The Egyptians understood something profound when they created all these elaborate rituals. Sometimes the point isn't whether the magic works, but that you loved yourself enough to try, cared enough to make the effort, believed enough to reach beyond the purely rational into the realm of maybe, perhaps, possibly. Rest now in that softer knowledge. Let the river carry you gently into sleep, into dreams where ancient priestesses might whisper secrets that won't quite survive the morning, but will leave you feeling somehow lighter, somehow more connected to the long chain of humanity that stretches behind and ahead. All of us trying to love and be loved in a world that makes no promises but offers infinite chances. The Nile flows. Hathor smiles. You breathe slowly, deeply, sinking into sleep like sinking into warm water. The love spells are finished, the hair charms sealed, the story told, and you, dear listener, you're exactly where you need to be, suspended between waking and dreaming, between ancient and modern, between magic and reality, in that perfect space where everything is possible and nothing is required except your gentle drift toward rest. Sleep well, the river flows on, the magic, whatever magic there ever was, has done its work.